Good evening, and welcome to this special report from the Human Error News Network. Tonight, we're on the scene of a story that we see, well, almost every single day in the tech world, the security breach. And you know, the first draft of that story is always the same. It gets chalked up to human error. But is that the real headline? We're about to launch an investigation to find out. So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the initial blame game, and then we're going to go inside the systemic flaws our reporting has uncovered. After that, we'll dive into a whole new way of thinking, learning instead of blaming, reveal a really powerful solution, and show you how to shift security responsibility before we land on the final, crucial takeaway. All right, so our investigation starts right where most security incident reports end, with that convenient culprit, human error. You know, it's the easy answer, the quick conclusion, but as we're about to see, it usually buries a much deeper and honestly a much more important story. And the scale of this problem is, well, it's pretty revealing. A recent survey from Bellsoft of over 400 developers found that a staggering 62% of container security mistakes were pinned on human error. For a lot of people, that's case closed. But for us, that's just where the investigation begins. This is the central question of our entire investigation tonight. I mean, if a huge majority of errors are being blamed on people, are we supposed to believe that most developers are just bad at their jobs? Or, and this is the key, is there something systemic going on? Something in the environment that's basically setting them up to fail? And this brings us to a really critical choice, and it's really the guiding principle of our whole report. When something goes wrong, you can either point a finger or you can search for a lesson. And our investigation suggests that the tech industry has been doing way too much of the finger pointing and not nearly enough of the learning. So to find out what's really happening, we went straight to the front lines. We dug into the data, we looked at the evidence from the field, and what we found wasn't a story of carelessness. It was a story of a system that's under just immense pressure. And this chart, wow, it tells you almost everything you need to know. When developers were asked about their single biggest challenge in keeping containers secure, the number one answer from nearly half of them, it wasn't about a lack of skill. It was a lack of time and resources. They're being asked to do more with less, and security is really feeling the strain. So what happens when you're under that much pressure? You take shortcuts, risky ones. For convenience, developers are tossing tools into their production containers that just don't belong there. I'm talking about command line shells in 54% of cases and package managers in 39%. Now, these are super useful for debugging, sure, but in a live environment, they're powerful tools you're handing right over to an intruder, just blowing up your attack surface.
The problem really starts at the very foundation. So many teams are building on top of these big, general-purpose distributions like Ubuntu or Debian. And look, they're fantastic operating systems, but they come loaded with hundreds of packages and libraries that your specific app will never, ever use. And every single one of those is another potential door for an attacker.
And make no mistake, this is not some niche problem. Our data shows that a majority, 55% of developers, are using these bloated, all-purpose images in production. Why? Because it's the default. It's the path of least resistance. But when just one vulnerability is found in one of those unused packages, it forces security teams into this frantic, stressful race to patch thousands of different instances. Which brings us to the million-dollar question in our investigation. If developers know this is a risky way to do things, why does it keep happening over and over again? Well, it's not because they're unaware of the risk. It's because the system they work in, the tools they're given, the deadlines they're under, it pushes them down that path of least resistance every single time. Okay, so this is the major turning point in our story. Instead of asking who messed up, we started asking a different question. Why was it so easy to mess up in the first place? And that one simple change shifts the entire focus away from the individual and onto the environment they're working in. And what that leads to is a really clear conclusion. The human error headline, it's a total misdirection. The evidence doesn't point to careless developers. It points to a system that consistently makes the secure choice the harder choice. The tools, the workflows, those are the real culprits. But hey, it's not all bad news. Our investigation didn't just uncover the problem, it also pointed directly to a solution. There's a new approach emerging that addresses these systemic flaws head-on. In fact, developers themselves are already pointing the way forward. When they were asked what would be the most helpful thing for ensuring container security, nearly half of them, 48% said pre-hardened security-focused base images. They're literally asking for a better, more secure starting point. So let's compare the two approaches, side by side. The old way, it's like trying to defend a sprawling, crumbling castle with hundreds of doors and windows. The attack surface is huge, and the maintenance is a nightmare. The new way, with minimal hardened images, that's like a modern, secure vault. It starts with only what's necessary, which drastically cuts the attack surface and shifts a lot of that security work to the vendor. And check out the incredible domino effect this has. You immediately reduce your vulnerability exposure. That, in turn, reduces the operational strain on your teams. You can even reduce your cloud costs because the images are smaller and more efficient. And, circling all the way back to our headline, you fundamentally reduce the risk of what was always getting labeled as human error. So, how do we actually put this into practice? Well, the key is a strategic shift in how we think about who's responsible for security. It's about moving it from being an endless internal task to a managed service you get from a trusted vendor. This is really the heart of the strategy, and Bellsoft CEO Alex Belakrilov put it perfectly. He said that by adopting hardened images, a huge chunk of that ongoing security and maintenance responsibility shifts to the image vendor. It's not just about getting software. It's about a partnership that lowers your team's burden and the total cost of ownership. It's a win-win. And making the switch really just boils down to 3 practical steps. First, audit your current images. Find all those non-essential tools and get them out of there. Second, separate your environments. Use those minimal images for production and keep the bigger, tool-filled builds for debugging where they belong. And third, select a trusted vendor that specializes in providing these minimal, well-maintained images. And that brings us to the conclusion of our special report. The next time a security incident makes the news, we need to look right past that easy headline of human error and start demanding a much more accurate story. Because the real story, as we've seen, isn't about human error. It's about systemic failure. And that leads us to our final question for you tonight, and it goes way beyond just container security. Where else in our organizations, in our work, are we blaming people for failures when we really should be looking at the systems, the tools, and the pressures that led them there in the first place? That's the story we all need to investigate next. Thanks for joining us.